In this episode, we're going to focus on the habits that make cloud auditing credible when someone is truly skeptical, because real scrutiny is rarely polite and it is almost never satisfied by vague statements. A beginner can run a scan, glance at a dashboard, and say the environment looks fine, but an auditor, a security leader, or an investigator will ask how you know, what you checked, what you did not check, and whether someone else could reproduce your results. Evidence-ready auditing is the practice of working in a way that naturally produces proof as you go, instead of trying to assemble proof later from memory and scattered notes. In cloud environments, this matters even more because configurations change quickly, identities are complex, and activity is distributed across many services. A credible audit trail must survive questions like who made this change, when did the controls start working, and can you show that it stayed working for months? The goal is to build habits that are simple enough to do consistently, but strong enough that a tough reviewer cannot easily poke holes in your conclusions. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to our course companion books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at cyberauthor.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. A core habit is defining scope with precision, because evidence without scope is like a photograph with no label telling you what it shows. Scope answers which accounts, subscriptions, projects, regions, services, and environments are included, and it also answers what period the audit covers. In cloud settings, the difference between auditing production and auditing a test environment can be the difference between meaningful assurance and false confidence, so scope must be explicit. Precision also includes defining what data sources were used, such as configuration snapshots, activity records, and identity information, because different sources answer different questions. If you do not record scope up front, someone can challenge your results by arguing that you might have missed the most important area. Even if you did cover it, you may not be able to prove you did, which undermines trust. Evidence-ready habits treat scope as the first piece of evidence, not as an afterthought. Another habit is keeping a consistent baseline of control expectations, because evidence needs a reference point for what good looks like. A baseline should identify the critical controls you care about, like identity protections, logging coverage, network exposure boundaries, and data protection defaults. The baseline does not have to be perfect on day one, but it must be defined well enough that you can explain why you checked what you checked. Consistency matters because scrutiny often involves comparing audits over time, and if the baseline changes unpredictably, results become hard to interpret. When the baseline does change, evidence-ready habits record why it changed, when it changed, and what impact the change has on measurement and reporting. That transparency prevents the appearance of manipulating the baseline to make results look better. For beginners, the key lesson is that baseline management is part of auditing, not a separate project. Repeatability is one of the strongest defenses against scrutiny, because if someone can repeat your audit and get similar results, your conclusions become harder to dismiss. Repeatability depends on consistent methods, consistent data collection, and consistent documentation of how checks were performed. In a cloud context, this often means using the same benchmark checks or the same measurement approach each time, and recording the versions or configurations of the assessment process so you can explain differences later. A repeatable audit also uses consistent naming and organization so that evidence artifacts can be found again months later. Scrutiny often arrives long after the work was done, when people have moved on and details are fuzzy. Habits that support repeatability protect you from relying on memory, which is the weakest form of evidence. If your process is repeatable, the conversation shifts from "do we trust this" to "what do the results mean?" Evidence quality is another habit area, and it is more than collecting screenshots or exporting a report. High-quality evidence includes context that makes the evidence understandable and verifiable, such as resource identifiers, timestamps, relevant configuration values, and the relationship between the evidence and the control being tested. For example, if you claim that logging is enabled, evidence should show what logs are collected, where they are stored, how long they are retained, and whether they capture the actions that matter. If you claim that access is restricted, evidence should show who has access, what permissions they have, and how that aligns with roles and business needs. Evidence should also be specific enough that a reviewer can trace it back to the environment, not generic statements like all systems are compliant. The stronger the evidence, the less room there is for arguments that the finding is ambiguous or the conclusion is a guess. For beginners, the goal is to learn to record evidence in a way that answers obvious follow-up questions before they are asked. Chain of custody is a concept that sounds formal, but in practice, it is simply the habit of preserving evidence integrity. In cloud auditing, evidence might be generated from configuration data, logs, or tool outputs, and scrutiny may include questions about whether the evidence could have been altered after collection. Evidence-ready habits include storing results in a controlled location, maintaining retention so older evidence is still available, and ensuring that evidence includes timestamps and attribution. Attribution means you can show who performed the check or who collected the evidence, which matters for accountability and for understanding potential bias or error. Integrity means you can show that evidence was not edited to hide problems, which is especially important when audits occur after incidents. You do not need to be overly technical to appreciate the principle. Evidence should be preserved in a way that builds trust. When you treat evidence as something that might be questioned later, you naturally collect and store it with more discipline. Another habit is documenting assumptions, because every audit contains assumptions, and unspoken assumptions are easy targets during scrutiny. An assumption might be that certain accounts are out of scope because they are managed by a different team, or that a service is not used because it is disabled by policy. It might also be that certain data classifications apply, or that certain identity groups represent job roles accurately. If you do not document assumptions, a reviewer can challenge your audit by pointing out that one assumption was wrong, and that can undermine confidence in everything else. Evidence-ready habits make assumptions explicit and, where possible, back them with evidence or validation. This does not mean writing long essays. It means stating what you believed and why, so others can evaluate it. On an exam, this habit shows up as answers that emphasize documenting scope, context, and rationale rather than simply stating that controls exist. Handling exceptions is another area where scrutiny is intense, because exceptions can become hiding places for unmanaged risk. An evidence-ready habit is treating exceptions as formal decisions with documentation, scope limitations, and review cycles, not as informal shortcuts. If a benchmark check fails, but the configuration is necessary for a business purpose, you should be able to show who approved the exception, what compensating controls exist, and when the exception will be reviewed or retired. Scrutiny often focuses on exceptions because they are where controls are weakest, and they can reveal whether governance is real or only performative. Good habits also include measuring exceptions over time to ensure they do not expand beyond what was approved. If an exception was intended to apply to one resource but later spreads to many, that is drift, and it should trigger a response. Evidence-ready auditing makes exceptions visible and accountable rather than invisible and permanent. Another habit that helps audits survive scrutiny is separating observation from interpretation. Observation is what the evidence shows, like a setting value, an access list, or a log record, while interpretation is what you conclude about risk and control effectiveness based on that observation. When audits blur these, people can argue about opinions instead of facts. Evidence-ready habits record the observation clearly first, then connect it to the control objective and the requirement, and only then describe the risk or severity. This structure helps reviewers who might disagree with your severity rating but still accept the underlying evidence, which keeps the audit useful. It also helps when different stakeholders need different views, such as engineers wanting precise details and executives wanting summarized risk. By keeping facts and conclusions distinct, you reduce the chance that scrutiny derails the process. For beginners, this is a powerful habit because it forces clarity and reduces emotional debate. Auditing habits also need to include follow-through evidence, because scrutiny often asks not only what you found, but what you did about it and whether the fixes worked. Evidence-ready auditing includes tracking findings to remediation, recording who owns each fix, and collecting proof that the fix was implemented and remains in place. This connects auditing to continuous improvement and to configuration drift management, because a control that was fixed once but later drifts back is not truly stable. A strong habit is to record the before and after state so that you can demonstrate measurable change rather than claiming improvement. Scrutiny also includes questions about timeliness, such as how quickly critical findings were addressed and whether there is a pattern of delayed remediation. When your habits capture these timelines naturally, you can answer those questions with confidence rather than scrambling. This is where auditing becomes more than a periodic check. It becomes an evidence-backed story of risk reduction over time. When you combine these habits, you end up with an auditing approach that is defensible because it is transparent, repeatable, and grounded in high-quality evidence. You define scope clearly, maintain a consistent baseline, collect evidence with context, preserve integrity and attribution, and document assumptions and exceptions. You separate observations from interpretations, which makes reviews more productive, and you connect findings to remediation with proof that controls remain effective. The result is not just a report, but a durable trail that can support governance, compliance, incident response, and leadership decisions. On an exam, this mindset helps you choose answers that emphasize evidence, repeatability, and accountability rather than vague claims of being secure. In real cloud environments, these habits protect you when scrutiny arrives unexpectedly, because you can demonstrate what you checked, why you checked it, and what the evidence shows. That is what it means for an audit to survive real scrutiny, and it is also what makes security trustable in environments that change every day.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.